Today, we welcome Paul Gadola. Hi, Paul.
Hello.
We're so excited he's here. Paul and his wife, Shelly, they live in Damascus with how many dogs? Four?
Four dogs, and they've all just been given a treat, and all windows are shut. So hopefully blinds are down. So hopefully we don't have any crazy ruckus during this.
Oh, wonderful. Paul and Shelly own Iron Mountain CrossFit and Sunmill Prep. I bet you guys know their businesses. Paul tells me he's working on a book.
Yeah.
So he's happy to say that pretty much everything he said here before, he still believes to be true. That's a good thing. So Paul's talk today is entitled, "The Present State of the World is Exactly What You Need It to Be." So take it away, Paul.
Okay. So as always, thank you so much for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure. It's really good to see a lot of the familiar faces up there today that I haven't seen for a long time. So it's great seeing y'all. And Harry, I've enjoyed all your stories from California. I've read them all. So keep those coming. And of course, I haven't been on any Zooms with y'all, but I do usually get on and catch the talk later in the week, courtesy of the link Harry sends out. So just try to get right into it here and try to time myself so we know how long we go. My title, of course, Present State of the World is exactly what you need it to be. Hopefully I answer that. But I'm going to start out or explain that. But I'm going to start out today with just telling you two stories about myself, and they're both super short. And the first one is that I actually was in a fraternity in college, which you might find amusing. But after I graduated, I went back to the fraternity or to the college for the weekend, and I'm not even sure why I was going, but I walked into the fraternity. This is only a few years after, so a lot of the current brothers would have met the younger brothers when I was there. And I walked into the house and walked up to the first brother that I saw and said, "Hey, I'm Paul Gadola. I used to be a brother here." And he looked at me kind of inquisitively and said, "Really? You're Paul Gadola?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I thought you'd be much bigger." So of course I caught that pretty funny. But it came into play years later when somebody asked me if I believed in the God of the Bible. And we won't get into too much depth here about exactly what I believe as far as that God goes, but I said, I think that God is bigger than we think and bigger than we can think. And if I'm correct about that, and I finally meet God and God's just a dude, I'll say, "Well, really? You're God? I thought you'd be much bigger." And the second story was at my aunt's funeral many years later. And it was actually at the dinner gathering following the funeral mass. She was Roman Catholic. And I was sitting with my cousin. His name's also Paul. He's my cousin's wife, actually. And I can't even remember what was going on in my life that made me say this, but I said to him, "I don't know. I just feel so disconnected." And he looked at me right in the eyes and asked the obvious question: "Disconnected from what?" Of course, that was a rhetorical question. It just stated the obvious, that we are part of a whole that is both bigger than we think and bigger than we can think. Some people do call that God. Some people call that the universe, some Tao and some nature. Some just call it love. There's a Greek word, cosmos, with a K. That means the whole of creation. It doesn't matter what you call it. It only matters that you become aware and understand that you are undeniably part of it. Regardless of how you identify yourself, be it religious, agnostic, atheist, or any other label, you are unavoidably one part of something much bigger. Well, that made me really start thinking about what it is that I believed and what I thought, but I knew that I was part of this thing much bigger. So I started thinking about that disconnected piece. What does that mean? Well, when you're disconnected from something, you're separate from it. But of course, you can't be separate from the whole, from the cosmos. You're an individuation within that whole. We often mistake it as a feeling of separateness. We feel disconnected and out of touch. It feels real. It's not, it's an illusion. Now you might be saying, wait a minute, I don't feel disconnected. I know I'm part of something bigger. Well, that's great. I'm glad you don't feel disconnected. However, this illusion does more than just create a feeling of separateness or disconnection. This is quite evident when we watch the news at night or read social media or anything like that. This illusion leads to suffering. In fact, I'll posit that it's the cause of all the suffering of the world that is related to human behavior. So this suffering is an interesting word. Like much of the English language used today, meaning of suffering largely depends on the content. We often think of suffering as the experience of something bad, unpleasant, undesirable, painful, or whatever other negative connotation you can think of. Well, this is arguably more often the case. The experience of suffering is also said to lead to wisdom. We won't be able to quite get into that today, but let's look at the other aspect of that suffering that is caused. Where does that come from? I'm not going to go into details here on the types of suffering. I mean, you guys get it. There's all kinds of different types, but I'm more interested in where does that suffering come from? Well, it comes from our mind. And in order to experience life, we have to have some sort of awareness or sense that we exist as a unique and separate entity. This awareness or sense of existence, whatever it is, has a transcendent nature. That is, that it's beyond the scope of the human mind. Because of this, we may not be able to quite put our finger or label it. Exactly what it may be precisely knowable or not, but in either case, we have some sort of intangible trait that allows for this awareness. The intangible trait is commonly known as consciousness. We experience it something like this. We have awareness of our consciousness via our thoughts in the present moment. We use the word mind as a general term to point to this. We can consider it like this. Our mind contains both our thoughts and our awareness of thoughts. We see this in like phrases such as keep that in mind, or hold that in your constant conscious awareness, or be cognizant of something. So the mind is controlling what we experience. And so we have an existence then that we're here alive, moving. We have an existence. That existence requires a sense of or a state of being. The state of being is like the mindset that underlies how you are behaving in all instances on a moment-to-moment, day-to-day basis. This state of being is the link to the suffering previously discussed. So let's look at that. All right, so here's what we have. We have to be separate to experience it. If we were all one in this big mesh glob that we don't understand, we're not going to be able to distinguish ourselves. We wouldn't get it. All right, so the mind then works as the operating system of this state of being. It allows us to experience life, but then it's also going to cause the problem. All right, so it looks something like this. This means that the mind is necessary for daily functioning life. It allows for the basic decision-making throughout our life. It doesn't stop there, though. The mind also allows for perception or interpretation of the stimulus or the information that was received. This will be experienced as thoughts. Thoughts can become words, actions, and deeds. The content of these thoughts will be correct. That is, it's true or incorrect. So that means it's false or incorrect perception happens. Incorrect perception creates a false understanding. That is to say, incorrect perception creates the illusion. Now, I want to look at, so that I'm talking about the illusions there and the problems of it. So what would be the opposite of that? Well, omniscience, right? It's an infinite knowledge, understanding, or perception. And so we can't possibly be exposed to all that's necessary for this. Except for that one big hole, there's nothing that can have that. So any one thing that contains something else contains two things now. So there's not a good image for this, but this is about the best I've come up with. So if this is the one hole, I think you can see it pretty clearly on my black shirt here. If this is the one hole and it becomes, that hole splits and somehow now there's two. But as soon as there's two, there's more than two too, because there's spaces and there's going to be other stuff around it. I'm not going to get too far into that, but that's the way we experience. We have to be separate from that hole. We're part of that hole, but we're separate for that hole. Okay. So that hole, that would be what is known as absolute truth or ultimate truth. That is the only thing that there is, that one absolute truth, and all other truths emanate from that. What all that means is that unless we are that alone, which we are not, our perception is always false. We just cannot possibly understand everything or know everything that we must know in order to have clear, true, precise perception. We just cannot do it. So this creates a conundrum that we must be separate from the one big whole in order to experience life. We must be separate from God, the Tao, anything you want to call it. But by being separate, we are living in an illusory state. So this is the illusion of separateness. Now, I will posit that that illusion of separateness is really what is meant by the fall. So because we had to have that, we had to have the fall. So the fall is a good thing in terms of our experience here. So what this illusion of separateness does, it's the root of all problems. It's the root of all conflicts and suffering between people. It also creates both the suffering we experience within our own mind and the sense of the longing for a more pure and simple time. The main goal of what I want to talk to you today about is how do I get past that? Well, for me, it all comes down to truth. And there's one aspect of my book, it's actually, I want to get some help with you guys from, because I've been calling it the path of truth, but that might kind of make people think incorrectly about it. We'll get to that though. So the thing is at all times, it's always the present moment. And you guys all know that. And what that means is in that present moment, it's the eternal moment of now. It's the sum total of all our experiences merging with the endless possibilities of the future. And it's in this moment that we have to express like our true nature. And this is what we would be without causing any suffering. Now that's complicated, of course. So let me talk about the difference between a journey and a path. And this is at the end, by all means, of course, I would like all questions, but this is something I specifically want help with. So this is specifically out of my book. So what I say is, this is the story of my journey on my path in life. It's always the present moment on the journey. This eternal moment of now is the sum total of all our experiences merging with the endless possibilities of the future. We have this moment to express our true nature. By journey here, so very specifically, what I'm talking about is journey, the word journey. I mean the sum total of all my experiences in my life. Our journey is the experiences in the physical world. The journey is our life and all we encounter during it, the places we go and the people we meet and interact with. All things are connected. Now, each individual's path, this is different than a journey. Each individual's path is the behavior within the experiences of the journey. We can choose our path. The path will influence the journey, but it can't control it. Our path is rooted in the mind. The choices and decisions made in our mind. These choices and decisions are reflected in our personal outward behavior. Our path is how we navigate life on a moment-to-moment basis. Any personal codes of conduct, ethics, standards of behavior, or a moral compass that we abide by are demonstrated by and through our path. Everyone is on a path. We may each travel our path consciously or unconsciously. So as a side note there, that's those two words, journey and path. That's one thing I think sometimes there's different sayings, like there's, many paths up the mountain. There's no wrong, path. Only the person that's saying that everyone else's path is wrong. But then also you hear many people say that Jesus is the way. And of course, that's very similar to the word path or journey. So anyways, at the end of this, I'd be really curious what you think the best term to use there, because I think you guys get what I'm trying to say, but I don't want people to misinterpret something just because of that word. So, as I said, this talk, the present state of the world, is exactly what you need it to be. Well, so what do I do with this? Well, Yogi Berra had a famous quote, and he said, let me see if I can share this here real quick. So he said, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. Well, I think Yogi had some really pretty deep wisdom there. And I'm a sucker for a metaphor. So when I came to the metaphorical fork in the road, when after my aunt's funeral, so which way do I go? There really wasn't a choice, because I was choosing between going towards truth and anything that's not truth. So that one big hole is the truth, and it's beyond our scope. And so, looking in any scripture or any historical writing or mystic or anything, they're going to tell you can't talk to that. You can only, point at it, like the finger pointing at the moon and all that. But you can orient yourself towards the truth. And beyond that, any choice that you make, the right or wrong, is only going to be in our head. And from somebody else's perspective, something might be what we think is right, they might think's wrong. And this, of course, is exactly what we have going on in the world right now, is everybody thinks they're right. Of course they do. You can't help that. And we've talked about that before in my talks here. And there's different ways you do that, different ways you think you're right, but you're justifying your behavior, you're justifying your thoughts is the bottom line. All of those things, all of the seeming choices, and then the judgments we put on them, whether it's good or bad, right or wrong or whatever, those are in our mind. And the best we can do is orient ourselves to truth. Now, of course, we're going to fall short and we're going to screw up and do things that are wrong. I mean, for my money, that's what sinning is. We're missing the mark. That's the definition of sinning. But if we consciously are choosing to orient ourselves towards the truth, that's all that we can do. So we start becoming aware of our thoughts. Exactly what are our thoughts? Is it a pure thought, just a thought? Or are we putting a judgment on that thought? Are we making it right or wrong, good or bad? And we have to remember that everybody else thinks they're right. And so when we get into these conversations with the person that we disagree with, most likely politically now, they think they're right. So we have to have a deeper understanding of it. If we do know better, if we create the conflict with them, if we make them feel that they've been attacked, we're validating their worldview exactly. They think their worldview is getting taken away. Maybe their worldview isn't high enough. Maybe they haven't developed that far. That would be like a developmental hierarchy. That's a real thing, different than a dominator hierarchy. Dominator hierarchy is a power control thing by humans, controlling other humans through power. But we all go through developmental hierarchies, and we know this. Simple as something in mathematics, where we go from addition and subtraction, multiplication, down to road to algebra and whatnot. But we have to go through that developmental sequence. Well, if we have truly developed to a higher level, if we have reached a higher understanding, a level of enlightenment, if you will, we cannot attack other people. And so the world as it is, with all the things that may be causing suffering, we still have our chance to react to it. What do we want to do about it? It's it. We have one chance to do it. In each moment, we have one chance to do it over and over and over again. So it is what we want it to be. And if we didn't have those challenges on a daily basis, we'd be heinously bored. And we can dream of a heaven or a moksha or whatever kind of utopian view. But if we had that 24/7, we'd probably just get bored. And that's why I say that the present state of the world is exactly what you need it to be.